There's a secret most people will never tell you, not because they're hiding it, but because they've never seen it. It's hidden in plain sight, coded into the lives of those who walk through the world with a strange weight in their spirit. They look normal. They go to school, work their jobs, laugh at jokes, scroll through social media. But inside, something is off. There's a disturbance, a friction, a quiet war that never ends. And if you're honest with yourself, you already know what I'm talking about, because you've felt it too. You've felt the invisible pressure, the constant sense that something is following you, not a ghost, not paranoia, but a divine whisper trailing your every step. You've had moments where reality almost seemed to bend, where things lined up just a little too perfectly, or collapsed just a little too violently. And you asked why, maybe in prayer, maybe in silence, maybe screaming into your pillow at 3 a.m. Why is this happening to me? Why does it feel like I'm being stretched, broken, watched, called? Here's the truth no one else dares to say. You're not cursed. You're chosen. But not in the way most people think. You're not chosen for comfort. You're chosen for confrontation. You are one of the dark, chosen ones, those who are not born into light, but into shadow. Those who do not awaken with gentle love and light messages, but through chaos, loss, betrayal, and deep spiritual discomfort. And God, yes, the real source, the infinite intelligence, the divine architect, is constantly sending you signs, warnings, alarms. But 99% of people miss them, even the ones who are chosen. Because here's the catch: God doesn't shout, God disrupts. If you're waiting to hear a booming voice from the sky or see an angel appear in your room, you're missing the real language of the divine. God speaks through patterns, through pressure, through the parts of your life that refuse to work. And the first sign God is warning you, one that almost everyone ignores, is the feeling of spiritual dissonance. That low, constant hum of dissatisfaction. The job that pays well but feels like death. The relationship that looks good but drains you. The life that makes sense but feels like a lie. You think you're just ungrateful. You think you're broken. But that's the warning. That's the vibration of misalignment. That's God tapping your soul, saying, you are not where you're supposed to be. Wake up. And when you ignore that sign, the signs get louder. The second sign is repetitive chaos. You keep losing things: money, people, opportunities. You keep ending up in the same kinds of toxic loops, the same arguments, the same heartbreaks. And you think life is unfair. You think you're cursed. But the truth is, God is interrupting your comfort to save your calling. You weren't designed to fit in. You weren't sent here to build a life that looks good to others. You were sent here to carry a frequency that disrupts illusions. But before you can do that, you have to be disillusioned yourself. And that's painful. That's why the third sign is sacred isolation. The people around you start to fall away. You feel like no one understands you anymore. Conversations feel shallow. The things you used to enjoy now feel hollow. You're not depressed. You're being separated because God needs your attention. And when you're surrounded by noise, you can't hear the whisper. Have you noticed how the more you try to fix your external world, the more your internal world screams? That's not failure. That's divine friction. That's the fourth sign, inner rebellion. Your soul starts rejecting the life your ego built. You can't force yourself to do what used to feel easy. You can't fake the smile anymore. You feel raw, agitated, restless. That's not just mood swings. That's your spirit trying to break free. And if you keep suppressing it, if you keep denying your truth, it turns into the fifth sign, spiritual breakdown. Everything collapses. The relationship ends. The job falls apart. The mask cracks. And you're left with nothing but yourself. That's the moment you either numb out or you finally listen. Because that breakdown isn't punishment. It's preparation. It's the divine reset button. And if you dare to stay conscious through it, you'll start to notice something strange. The sixth sign, divine echoes. You keep hearing the same message in different places. A line in a song. a quote you scrolled past. A stranger says something that pierces your heart. You hear it again and again. Not with your ears, but with your being. That's not coincidence. That's God composing a frequency for you to follow. But here's the sign almost no one talks about, the seventh and final one. The one that separates the 1% who awaken from the 99% who stay trapped. The invitation to surrender. Not to religion, not to dogma, but to truth, to your soul contract. You start to feel pulled towards something you can't explain. You start to sense that your darkness wasn't a detour, it was a design. That your wounds are not shameful, they're sacred. That your pain is not punishment, it's prophecy. But to step into it, you have to let go of your old identity, your false safety, your victim story. And this is where most people turn back, because surrender feels like death. And in a way, it is. It's the death of the ego's illusion, the death of the persona you built to survive. But what rises from that death is something unshakable, unstoppable, divine. So I ask you, have you been ignoring the signs? Have you been mistaking your spiritual awakening for a breakdown? Have you been calling your divine separation loneliness? Have you been blaming yourself for the very storms that were designed to wake you up? Because if you're honest with yourself, you'll see it. You'll see that God has been calling you this entire time, not with fear, but with fire, not with rewards, but with revelations. And the question is, are you ready to answer that call? This is only the beginning.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Most people think when life falls apart, it means something went wrong. They think pain is a punishment, that isolation is abandonment, that failure is a cosmic no. But what if that's the biggest illusion of all? What if the breakdown was never a detour, and the suffering was never a mistake? What if the chaos you've been running from was actually the sacred set-up God's way of stripping everything false from your life so that only the real you remains? If you've ever felt like the ground beneath your feet was ripped away just when you thought you were finally getting it together, congratulations. That wasn't a failure. That was the initiation. The divine doesn't build warriors out of comfort, applause, or convenience. He builds them in the fire. And not just any fire, the fire that consumes everything you thought you needed, everything you thought you were. Why? Because God is not interested in who you pretend to be. He's not interested in your ego's version of success. He's interested in your essence, the raw, unfiltered frequency of your soul. But that's why it hurts. That's why the chosen ones often feel like the cursed ones. Because before you become a weapon of light, you must be shattered, torn open, emptied. You must be stripped of all the illusions that would make you too soft, too scared, too attached to be used for something greater. And that process? It's brutal. It's lonely. It's confusing. But it's divine. You see, when God chooses you, truly chooses you, He doesn't send you blessings first. He sends you exposure. He reveals every lie you've believed about yourself. He brings to the surface every wound you've buried. He shows you every place where you've made fear your master and called it wisdom. And then He watches. Not because He's cruel, but because He's waiting to see if you'll wake up. Because until the false self dies, the real self cannot rise. And the real self? That's the version of you that was forged in silence, in darkness, in the nights you cried out and heard no answer. Those nights weren't empty. They were sacred. They were classrooms. And if you were paying attention, you began to notice something strange. The same things that broke you also reshaped you. Every betrayal taught you discernment. Every failure taught you resilience. Every loss taught you detachment. Every lie taught you how to recognize truth. And slowly, without even realizing it, you were becoming something else. Not just healed, but hardened in holiness. Not bitter, but divinely dangerous. Because now, you're not just a believer, you're a force. But here's what most people miss. This transformation doesn't happen once. It's not a movie moment. It's a lifestyle. God will keep breaking off layers of you. Not to destroy you, but to refine you. because every time you level up spiritually, there's an older version of you that has to die. The more powerful the calling, the deeper the breaking. And if you're one of the dark chosen ones, you already know this. You've lived it. You've watched your life fall apart, not once, but over and over again. And every time it did, something deeper inside you activated. Something unseen. Something sovereign. Something unexplainable. That's not coincidence. That's design. You weren't made for the easy road. You were made for impact. And impact requires intensity. It requires clarity. It requires detachment from anything that would dilute your power. Here's the dangerous truth. Many people pray to be used by God, but few are willing to be prepared. Everyone wants divine pressure, but pressure is the price. And if you've been crushed lately, if you've been confused, if you've been stripped bare, it's not because you're being punished. It's because you're being positioned. You're in the divine wilderness, not the devil's trap, and the wilderness is where weapons are forged. So, let me ask you something only the brave can answer. What if your pain wasn't about you? What if your heartbreak, your loss, your suffering, what if all of it was preparing you to carry a frequency this world has never seen? What if your collapse was the only way God could clear the space for your real mission to begin? Would you still call it failure, or would you call it sacred? Because here's what most never realize: God doesn't send you into battle until you've been trained in silence. Your wounds are your wisdom. Your scars are your sermon. The very things you thought disqualified you are the exact things that certify you. That's why your story matters. That's why your struggle matters. Not because it makes you special, but because it makes you equipped. And now, you're being called. Not to build a perfect life, but to become a perfect instrument. Not to impress the world, but to pierce it. And that can only happen when you stop resisting the breaking and start surrendering to the becoming. Because the moment you do, you realize something terrifying and beautiful. You were never being broken. You were being built. There's a part of the journey they never tell you about. Not in churches, not in self-help books, not in polished spiritual seminars. It's the part where you live in two worlds at once: the visible world everyone sees and the invisible one that only you feel. It's not glamorous. It's not Instagrammable. It's the part where you're being awakened by God in secret while still playing roles in a world that doesn't know who you really are yet. This is the divine double life. And if you're living it, you already know how heavy it is. You wake up every day with a strange duality in your chest. On the surface, you're doing what's necessary, smiling at people, going to work, maintaining relationships. But under the surface, there's a storm, a fire, a frequency that doesn't match your surroundings. You sense things others don't. You feel energy when no one else notices. You receive insights, intuitions, warnings, and you pretend like everything's normal. But it's not. You're not. And that's the point. You're being transformed in silence. That silence is not a void. It's a forge. It's where God tests you in ways no one else will ever see. He gives you revelations that don't come with applause. He gives you visions that don't come with validation. He speaks to you in moments where no one else is listening. Why? Because he's teaching you how to walk by faith, not by feedback. He's training you to lead from a place so deep, so pure, so rooted in spirit that nothing external can shake it. But that training comes with a cost. You begin to feel disconnected from the world around you. You're surrounded by people, but still feel alone. You're involved in conversations, but your soul is somewhere else. You laugh, but it's hollow. You perform, but it feels like betrayal. That's the divine tension, the stretch between who you've been and who you're becoming. And it's not because you're unstable. It's because you're in transition. You're not crazy for feeling like you don't belong. You're not broken for wanting more than what this world offers. You're not wrong for craving solitude, silence, and spiritual depth. That's the calling pulling at your core. And here's what few understand. Before the chosen ones lead in light, they must first walk through every kind of shadow. Not just to survive it, but to understand it. Because how can you liberate people from darkness if you've never faced your own? That's why so many chosen ones go through hidden addictions, secret battles, private shame. Not because they're weak, but because they're being purified. God doesn't send warriors into battle with untested weapons. He tests you by letting you walk through your own wilderness. Not so you can be perfect, but so you can carry compassion. So when you stand in your power, you're not doing it from ego. You're doing it from empathy. You're doing it from a place of deep knowing. A place this world desperately needs. But here's the paradox. The more you awaken, the more invisible you feel. Not because you're unloved, but because God is hiding you, protecting you, shielding you from premature exposure. You're not being overlooked, you're being prepared in secret. And when the time comes, the unveiling will be undeniable. But until then, you must master the art of walking unseen. You must lead yourself long before you ever lead others. And that is one of the greatest spiritual disciplines, to trust the process when no one is watching. To remain faithful when there's no audience. To obey the whispers of your soul when no one claps. That's where true power is born, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Not in being seen, but in being still. So let me ask you something few dare to ask themselves. Can you handle being hidden? Can you stay committed to your calling even when it feels like no one sees your growth, your effort, your sacrifice? Because that's the test, not just of faith, but of frequency. Can you vibrate at the level of your future while living in the discomfort of your present? Can you carry the vision without the validation? Because if you can, then you're being groomed for something far greater than success. You're being prepared for impact, and impact doesn't need a crowd. It needs clarity. It needs authority. It needs a soul that has walked through fire and come out not just clean but consecrated. And that's why the double life matters. That's why the shadows matter. Because when you finally emerge, when you finally stand in your full power, people won't just hear your words. They'll feel your frequency. They'll know you've been somewhere. They'll know you didn't learn this from books or trends, but from the silence God dragged you through. So if you're still in the shadows, if you're still pretending in public while transforming in private, don't despise it. Honor it, because that's where the real ones are made. And when it's time, God will switch the light on, and the world will finally see what He's been crafting in secret all along. You. There comes a moment in every chosen one's journey that doesn't feel like a moment at all. It feels like confusion, like disbelief, like the world shifting beneath your feet without warning. You look around and suddenly things are responding to you differently. The doors that were once sealed shut begin to creak open. The people who used to ignore your energy now lean in. The words you speak carry weight. And the strangest part? You still feel unready, unqualified, unequipped, but the universe doesn't care. It starts listening anyway. This is the final sign. The sign that God has been working behind the scenes all along. The sign that the shadows you walked through were not in vain. And the sign that your vibration, your true, refined, sacred frequency has finally come online. You don't realize it at first. It starts subtly. A conversation shifts. An opportunity appears without force. You say something you've said 100 times before, but this time it lands differently. There's a power in your presence you didn't fabricate. It just is. This is what most people miss. The universe doesn't respond to your confidence. It responds to your alignment. And when you've been broken, stripped, and emptied, and you choose to rise anyway, not from ego, but from essence, you become a tuning fork for divine will. You don't have to convince. You don't have to try so hard. Your very existence begins to bend reality around you. Not because you chased it, but because you became it. But the real challenge of this moment isn't power, it's responsibility. Because now, your choices echo louder. Your energy reaches further, and your words create. You begin to realize that every thought is a seed, every action a ripple. And you can't afford to live unconsciously anymore. You can't afford to speak carelessly, to connect randomly, to move without intention. Because now the universe is mirroring you. And that mirror is clean, brutally clean. What you give, you get. What you withhold, you lose. What you resist persists louder, faster, sharper. That's why this stage is not about celebration. It's about refinement. It's when God watches to see if you'll forget the shadows that made you, if you'll trade your truth for status, if you'll use your power to dominate or to liberate. And this is where many fall, because they confuse influence for anointing. They think visibility is a sign of favor, when in reality it's a test. The spotlight doesn't just expose your light, it exposes your cracks. And so the final sign is not just that the universe obeys you, it's that you begin to obey yourself. You stop negotiating with your intuition. You stop explaining your convictions. You stop shrinking your truth to fit the comfort zones of others. And in that obedience, you unlock a level of protection and provision that nothing in this world can replicate. Synchronicity becomes normal. Miracles become expected. Not because you're special, but because you're surrendered. But here's the final question I want to ask you. Can you trust yourself with this power? Can you stay humble while being honored? Can you stay grounded while being lifted? Can you stay hidden in your heart while being seen by the masses? Because that's the real measure of a chosen one, not how much attention they can gather, but how much truth they can carry without compromise, how much light they can hold without becoming blinded by it, how much love they can give without needing it to be returned. And if you're feeling that shift, if people are reacting differently, if opportunities are appearing, if your presence is stirring things without effort, don't run from it, but don't idolize it either. Honor it, steward it, and remember where it came from. It came from the silence, the shadows, the sacred setup, the double life. It came from the moments you stayed awake when others slept, from the times you chose truth when it cost you everything, from the decisions no one saw but God. That's what makes you unstoppable. Not perfection, not popularity, but purity. A heart so clean, so honest, so surrendered that even heaven bends to listen. So now the question isn't whether or not you're chosen. You already know you are. The question is what you'll do now that the universe is listening. Will you speak from ego or from eternity? Will you build your kingdom or God's? Will you just awaken or will you awaken others? Because the world is waiting, and the signs were never random. They were instructions. And now it's your move.